Hello and welcome back. I'm here with Greg. Welcome back, Greg. Last week, you heard us talk about behavioral financing and finances and what that is, and we kind of hit the tip of the iceberg. Would you say, Greg? Right?
I would say so. There's so much more.
Yeah, yeah,
But we also don't want to put you to sleep either. So it's,
yeah.
it's a delicate dance.
Yeah, that's right. And Greg's very passionate about this, and so I'm sure he wanted to go deeper. But I think it was a good idea. Let's split this across a few episodes. So now we've introduced you to what it is, and so in today's episode, we're gonna kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the biases they're referred to, and what those are so that we can educate you on what you should be looking out for in yourself, and so you're not getting stuck in one of these biases that are all and I was thinking about this after we finished recording the last one, like, for you at home, you shouldn't be taking this personal in any way. If whatever we say here or something we said, you're like, oh, that's me, that's exactly what I did, and I feel bad now. It's like we all do it. We're humans. Like, we literally, no matter, like, it
Right.
has nothing to do
Right.
with you or anything. We literally all do this, and so we're hoping that by doing this this series, that we can kind of just make you aware of it, so at least the next time it happens, maybe you can pump the brakes a little bit and go, oh, I'm doing that thing that Greg talked about on the podcast.
That's exactly right. And it's really what it comes down to is, kind of at the very tip of the hierarchy of needs, right, is self-actualization. And that is being able to regulate your emotions, being able to be kind of look down
Mm,
on yourself, almost like a third party, and recognize when things are happening and
yeah,
recognize when feelings are popping up, and you know taking a moment and saying, okay, I see that, I see what I'm doing here, this is why I'm doing it, this is how I correct it. And that's really what this is about, right? The rational investor, and what we help people to be, and what our principal role, right? Yes, we're going to manage your investments, and we're going to do it well, and we're going to do all this financial planning for you. But one of the biggest things that we can do for people is to help them, help save them from themselves, because we all have these
yeah,
kind of inclinations, and it takes that calm outside view sometimes to say, this is why you might be feeling that way, and this is how we adjust.
yeah, yeah. I think it's great. And so, we're gonna outline some of these biases. I'm gonna cue you up with a couple here, Greg, and then we could go from there. But maybe the first one we could talk about is the loss aversion, the fear of losing out, or in common parlance now, FOMO.
I mean, that is such a big thing in everyday life, as well as just in finance as well,
Mm,
right? Like that affects decisions quite a bit,
yeah,
right? I mean, think about it in everyday life, FOMO, you know, and it goes hand in hand with hurting, right? If you see everybody else at an event, I want to be at that event. Why aren't I there?
yeah,
If you're on social media and you see you see a trend on social media, well, how come we're not baking sourdough bread? How come we're not raising
yeah,
chickens like everybody else seems to be,
yeah, yeah,
right? It's that you see that often kind of in day-to-day life, and you see it in finance as well, right? In loss aversion, it comes down to the fact that people weigh their losses, twice as much as
mm,
their wins, right? So the pain that they experience from a loss makes a bigger scar,
yeah,
than mental, impact, than the joy of a win.
mm-hmm,
And that impacts decisions. And it can, if you let it, uh, impact decisions negatively, right? Because sometimes
yeah,
you need the loss, right? That's part of being a rational investor. If you know when to sell, and no, aren't afraid to take that loss, and utilize that loss for purposes of offsetting gains, right? Um, and putting those resources towards uh, a better, more productive investment,
Mm,
then you're going to impact your overall plan. But some folks will hold on to losers too long,
yeah.
and to the detriment of their investments, to the detriment of their financial plan, because of that loss aversion, because of that not wanting to admit they made a mistake,
Mm.
not wanting to experience the pain or regret of a loss.
Yeah, and I mean it's just it seeps into our everyday life, right? Like think about, for those of you at home, that one time you got stung by a bee, like now you're afraid of bees but you didn't think about the thousands of times bees were around you that they didn't sting you,
That's right.
right? It was just that one time, just some happenstance that you got stung by the bee and now you're afraid of bees, but really they're around all the time.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. So yeah, I think about that's an interesting way to look at it, right? And I think you're gonna notice a trend for our listeners is holistically looking over time, but I think that's just thinking about that every day, right? It's like being scared to fly or drive a car, right? You're only thinking about that one worst case scenario or that bad thing that happened to you.
Right, and that's another bias, right? That's
Yeah.
recency bias,
Oh, yeah.
right? I mean, that's if you just saw news about a plane crash, right? Now in your head, well, the aviation sector, no good, right?
Right.
Can't invest in that, or it's unsafe to fly. Like that recent event is made a big impact in your psyche, and you're basing decisions on that recency, even if it may not be
Mhm.
supported by facts and
Yeah.
supported by evidence.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I think about that a lot. And not just with financial things, but just in life in general, right? And try to think about that because I think even, and this is something for those of you at home, like now, now that you start thinking about this and start focusing on it, even though you know it, man, fighting that feeling is still so hard. Like you're like, come on, man, be logical about this. Like I know, like this isn't real.
I mean, you're hitting it right on the head,
Yeah.
and that's so much of what this is are things that as rational human beings, right, which is at the base of all of us, we know.
Yeah.
Um, and I mentioned this in the last podcast. It's that emotional intelligence, that
Mm,
emotional stability, the emotional awareness that I think sets apart, uh, the strong investor, from others. It's what a good financial advisor will provide to you during times of
mm,
chaos. That is that kind of emotional stability, and it's really going to be and it really is already proving to be the difference maker, in workplaces kind of across all sectors, because AI can't provide that, not
yeah.
yet. We haven't reached the singularity where
Yeah. Yeah.
where the computers can talk us down, off a ledge. But a good emotionally stable and kind of seeing the forest advisor can.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's it's one of those things that I think falls, and you could speak to this too a little bit as a lawyer for so many years, right? It's one of those things when you partner with someone who has an expertise in a field, right? They bring this calmness and kind of this like status quo to it because we were talking about this last week where you're like, hey, I've only been here for doing this for 7 years and I've already seen the increase in this. Someone who's been doing it 20 or 30 may be like, oh yeah, that happens all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just having the ability to partner with someone who has seen this before, who's a little emotionally disconnected from, not you, but that problem, is just like really makes things so much easier.
Well, it really does, and there's studies to support that as well, right? The experienced investor, for instance, is going to be less affected by the ups and downs and volatility in the
Mm,
market versus a younger investor that went through the financial crisis of 2008, right at the beginning of their kind of
yeah,
investing career, um, has been shown to be almost permanently risk averse, right?
yeah,
Much less prone to an equity focused portfolio, than an experienced investor who has seen multiple, kind of black swan events, and they know that it's you don't have to take these drastic,
Right.
knee-jerk reactions in the other direction, you'll still come out of it with a diversified portfolio, with a solid portion allocated to equities. So yeah, it's that experience
Yeah.
that, the kind of the years in the saddle, I think, of weathering some of these storms that leads to that emotional
Stability.
intelligence.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah. Yeah, and I think to your point, that's actually one of the biases that our listeners have to watch out for is that anchoring bias, right?
that's right.
Getting stuck at the start of when they bought something at a certain price, or maybe they started in 2008 right before things went south, and that's now in their head forever as what this looks like.
It's exactly right. Right. That anchoring is kind of honing in on a certain point in time, right? Whether it's what you bought the stock for. You see it in real estate. Both realtors and sellers and buyers, hone in on the last purchase price, what the house
Yep.
sold for. Or you get this, right? My neighbor's house sold for 400. Therefore my house is worth 400. Well, that's discounting and kind of excluding all
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah,
information,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, does they have 5 bedrooms? You have 3.
Right,
They
right.
had a brand new roof. Yours is
Yeah.
25 years old. All these different, evidence and fact points get excluded when you anchor into that specific price, and you see that in stock prices too. Well, I bought it at 20. I can't sell it for less than 20. That company could be they could have gone through
Yeah.
massive change,
Yeah.
right? It's just not even the same
Right.
company anymore. That what you bought it for is irrelevant to the current status of that company's
Yes.
financial health.
Right.
So you have to base the decision on not this arbitrary, point in time or arbitrary price, but what's currently the reality.
Well, and that goes along, right? I mean, that's a tale as old as time, I think, because that's our parents always told us, hey, first impressions are always the most important, right? Because that's how people are going to remember you,
And they stick,
and they
right?
stick
Yeah,
just on that first
that's
impression,
right.
right? Like, and so it's a real thing out just in the world that happens, and this is no different than that. And that's that first impression that you as an investor have had, or your first recollection of the news was this good or bad thing that happened, and you're just, well, that's how it is.
And we see it in all sorts of, things, and you see some of these biases kind of transcend the finance field, and you see them in other ways as well, like the hot hand fallacy, right? A basketball player makes 5 or 6 threes
Yeah.
in a row. Well, they can't miss. Keep feeding them the ball.
Right. Yeah.
Well, mean reversion is going to happen at some
Yeah.
point, right?
Right,
This
right.
person, if they're a lifetime
Yeah.
35% 3-point shooter,
Yeah.
they're not going to keep up an 80% make rate,
Right.
right? It's going to come back, but that hot hand bias is, well, this can't stop.
Yes.
Give them the ball, right? We see that with stocks. This stock
Yeah.
is going to the moon. It's never going to come down,
Right. Yeah.
right? And then the reverse is the gambler's fallacy, and that's betting against it,
Right.
right? Like that's walking up to a roulette table and looking at the last 6 rolls, the last 6 spins were red. Well, it's got to go black. It can't continue to go red,
Right.
right? It's just it's the opposite, but similar
Yeah.
kind of heuristic, similar kind of bias that can lead you to just the wrong decision.
Yeah.
So these are all these things that seep into our decision making that we're all guilty of. We're all human.
Yeah.
We all have these, mental scars that have accumulated along the way, and it makes us feel and think a different way. And like we've said, the best thing you can do is kind of stop,
Yeah.
step outside yourself, look down at what's happening and say, okay, I'm feeling this way, but this is probably not, a permanent thing. Like, why am I feeling this way? What's at the base of it? Oh, it's this. Okay. Let me get back to basics. Let me get back to facts. And kind of make my decision from there versus getting caught up in this emotion.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, the first thing that popped into my head when we were talking about that was, we were talking about shooting and the hot hand was like your recollection of like Michael Jordan, for instance, where you're just like, oh, he was the best. He never missed a shot. Like
Right.
he was a hero when I was a child, like my hero when he was a child, like Michael Jordan, like it was a big deal. And then you go back on YouTube and you're like watching some of the highlights of like a full game and you're like, wait, he missed shots? Like that doesn't make any sense. That's
He
not
missed
what
lots of shots.
Yeah.
He missed lots of game winners. Like nobody
Right.
made nobody made every game winner. But
Yeah.
all we think about is those ones that he made at the buzzer, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you think about those kind of legendary games against Utah and
The flu game, right? Yeah, like all that stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Those are the things that stick in our heads, and we base it on that, right? You think about the greatest hitters of all time, and like, man, those guys could just always hit, but they still failed 6 or 7 times out of 10,
Right,
right?
right.
I mean,
Yeah, right. They had like 50 home runs out of what 300 games or
Right.
something.
Right. It's a long, 162 game season. I mean, it's so yeah, we get stuck on these things and we let emotions kind of
Yeah.
play in, and that's what leads to maybe some decisions that aren't optimal.
Yeah. And some of that can then lead to the next one, which is herding behavior.
That's exactly right. Right. I mean, that's just that following the crowd.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about that last time, and that's how the bubbles can happen, right? I mean, if you're, that FOMO, that fear of missing out, that wanting to join the crowd, we saw some of that during COVID, during the whole GameStop
Yeah.
craziness, and everybody was kind of jumping on that train. Well, depends on when you jumped on that train and as to whether or not it worked out for you, right?
100%.
Following the crowd does not always translate to success.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these biases are magnified by the way we consume content and information these days too, right? And that's a perfect example of very popular platform doing something, then it going to these news outlets who have to serve news 24 hours a day, so they need something to talk about. This is what seemed like at the time a feel good, oh yeah, and now it's blowing up, but half the people, regular people who maybe weren't on Reddit or weren't part of that initial push are coming in at a very different time than when it all started, right? And they just wanted to be diamond hands and all the
Right.
shoot in the moon, and they just, yeah, I'm gonna do all that, but they weren't there when it was $5 or $12 or whatever
No.
it started at, right? And so
No. And I think you lead to an important point there, and just the way that information is given these days, kind of the constant onslaught.
Yeah.
Right. It comes at you from so many different directions, and when news channels and TV and internet, when it went to essentially around the clock, it kind of stopped being news and became entertainment, right? I mean, it's just constant, whatever they can get content out of, they're going to throw at you. It might have a kernel of truth in there, but it's a lot of it's fluff, and people get caught up in that fluff.
Yeah.
And our job is to try to sift through the noise and the fluff and return people to the basics.
Yeah. And a lot of that, again, I'm going to do another slick transition into one of our other biases, but is the choosing now over later, the present bias, right?
Sure. That kind of hyperbolic spending, so to speak. So, spend now, save later. It's that that's ingrained in human behavior, right? We are not naturally prone to looking out long term, right? It takes emotional discipline. It takes, a well thought out plan and adhering to that plan to take action today that will benefit, us 15, 20 years from now. And you have to kind of combat that on a daily basis. We all do as humans, right? We all, At Strategic, we talk about living a great life, and that's very important here. That
Yeah.
is what we want our clients to live. We want our employees to live. That has to be a delicate balance between enjoying the most out of the present, uh, to the most responsible extent,
Yeah.
but not to the point of irresponsibility, and then yet still keeping an eye on the future.
Yeah, and finding that way of, for yourself, saving that money or putting it into, your 401k, or investing it not as a sacrifice, but as like a present
It
to your
is.
future self,
That's
right?
exactly what it is.
But it's hard, right? Because you're like, well, yeah, that's
But
nice.
I want this now.
But I need, like, I gotta get groceries. I got this other stuff right now that has to happen. And I think just being realistic with it, and for me, a lot of what I've learned over my time here is about that balance,
Mhm.
right? And saying, yeah, no, of course you got to live today and take care of your family today, but there's ways to do this that isn't going to be as detrimental mentally for you, like, to do this so that your future is also taken care of, right?
That's exactly right. And
It's
that gift to your future self is a great way
Yeah.
to see it. Um, I read where an effective tool is to use the app that shows you as an old person, as a in your 70, if
Yeah.
you're 50 years old, uh, 40 years old, 30 years old, show clients a picture of themselves when they're 75, 80, to kind of drive home the effect that it's coming, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
coming.
yeah.
And showing that, kind of breaking through that present day bias
Yeah.
of and making them see the future
Right.
more helps them save more,
Yeah.
right? And helps them give those presents to their
Yeah.
future selves. Yeah.
Well, and also just for me, as someone that is kind of in that stage of life where it's trying to do both, it's about little steps too, because I think sometimes when we look at the future, when we look at retirement, when we look at wealth in general, right? Like, wealth is a large word that feels sometimes incomprehensible,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, huh? And it's not about that. It's about doing small steps today to build that for your future so that you just have that great life, so that you're taken care of until you're 90 or 100 or whatever it is that you live to, so that you're not you don't you don't get to that age and go,
Shoot.
should have done
Kind of
that.
I kind of blew that.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's like that Back to the Future, like when he goes back in time and gets the betting book, right? And he wants
Right.
to make all the bets or goes in the future and gets all the wins, and then goes back in time to make the bets. And if I had bet this on the Knicks, or the Mets at that one time, I would have won. And so and, well, you could do that right now. There's
Yeah.
ways to 401k savings, investing
Yeah.
in evidence-based investments like that. Like, you could be doing that right now, and it's not going to be an instant win, but it'll be a long-term win. And 20, 30 years, 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to have what you need to live your great life. So
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and it's not, that's another bias, right? That conjunction fallacy, like that, equating one thing with another thing. If I
Yeah.
win the lottery, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the evidence doesn't play that out. I
No.
mean, most lottery winners have not gone on
Yeah.
to a lifetime of happiness. They've, ended up kind of burning through it and more miserable.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things that come into play there. We try to instill with folks, let's put a plan in place. Let's look at the future. Let's look at your future self. Let's see what is possible at your current, rate of income, your current situation, assuming assuming a couple things. Revisit that plan often, but also checking in with them on the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Right? Because it isn't all, money doesn't equal happiness, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure people are healthy. We want to make sure that, that all these other factors in place are in place for
Right.
them to live their best lives. And we believe very strongly in that. We want folks to, we want to check in with them on kind of all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all part of it, right? And though money can help, it's just one piece of the whole puzzle that we need to look at.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we got another great one in the books here, and we'll be back next week with Greg again, and we're going to talk about actionable items and things that you can do to kind of avoid or lean into some of these behaviors.
Awesome.
All
Looking
right.
forward to it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Please see the full disclosure in our show notes for more information.